I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. It's something that we're trialing. I think, like all organisations, we're having to find different ways of delivering our business at the moment. And certainly the initial trials that we've been running at a regional level for these webinars have been very successful with members. This is the first time we're trying it at a national level, and we're inviting all CECA members to take part in this call to discuss how industry and businesses can be helped through elements of government support that's been put in place, but also the work that CECA has been doing, both as an organisation and working across the sector to try and help member businesses. If you do have any questions, there is a chat function. You'll see on the first slide, there's a slightly different approach to using the chat function if you're on a mobile device, which should be accessible using a side arrow. Basically, if you can ask any questions through there, we are moderating the questions just because we're not quite sure what level of questions, how many they are. So to try and manage the key themes, there is someone who's moderating the questions as they come in. But this is really your webinar. This is for you to discover the things that you're struggling with, the things that you need more information with. I can't guarantee that we'll be able to answer every question, but if we can't, we will come back to you in the coming days, probably over the weekend, with answers to stuff that we can't answer immediately. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll now get underway. So I just want to run you through the structure of what we're going to be talking about today. So there's four real elements to this. First and foremost, it's around employer support. I know, because I sort of sit at the centre of all the feedback that's coming in from across all of the members, this is probably the biggest area where there's interest from members to try and understand the policy and some of the opportunities that are in place around employer support. Then we'll look at business support, and this is particularly support around cash flow. While the employment support may be the area of greatest interest, I think cash flow is without a shadow of a doubt going to be the biggest challenge for industry. We did some research both within CECA members and across the industry last week, and the results are fairly stark. Nearly half of all companies reported that they would face severe challenges to their business within 3 months based on a continued hiatus on work as a result of the coronavirus crisis. We'll then touch on procurement support, and this particularly focuses on guidance from the Cabinet Office around how public sector customers should be treating their supply chain. And then finally, I'm going to wrap things up with the way that CECA has been acting to support its members. So as I say, as we go through, please do ask questions in the chat mode, and we'll pick those up at the end. So, first and foremost, employment support. And if this is the area of greatest interest, the area within that has the greatest interest is the coronavirus job retention scheme, which many of you will know as furloughing. This was the big blunderbuss bazooka from government to try and support businesses, given that staff costs will make up a very significant proportion of industry's costs. It was recognised that covering those costs for businesses while there was no activity going on was going to be the first thing that would put individual businesses in jeopardy. So the government put in place the job retention scheme, the intention being that if people are unable to work because there is no work out there, or in particular cases where they are caring for relatives who are either vulnerable or have coronavirus, this would allow those people to be furloughed off work, and the government would cover up to 80% of their salary, up to a value of £2,500, including national insurance contributions and basic pension on top as well. The scheme should be available, we heard yesterday, from the 20th of April. And they were rather bullishly saying that those payments should be in place by the end of the month. This does apply to apprentices who can continue to train during their apprenticeship. However, if you are furloughing apprenticeship, you must ensure that they are continuing to receive at least the minimum wage within the confines of the job retention scheme furlough. Agency and umbrella company workers can be furloughed. Obviously, there's a discussion there in relation to how that's managed. That's only where they are PAYE through agency and umbrella companies. But given that that is the status of a large number of people in the industry, that has particular relevance to construction. Final point on this is that the qualifying employees must have started work on or before 28th of February. Clearly, there was a jeopardy that people would have plenty of ghost workers suddenly coming on the books in order to maximise benefits. I think the government is very keen to avoid inappropriate activities through this, but where there is a genuine need to furlough off workers because there is no workload, this feels like a very positive step for industry. We know that the feedback that we got from you as members was that this was the number one thing that you felt would make a difference to you as businesses. So I'll move on to the next element, which is around employment support, and this is around sick pay. This was one of the earliest interventions from the government, and it was recognising that employees were going off ill for reasonable lengths of time, for 2 weeks, as a result of the need to self-isolate where there were symptoms of coronavirus. So the government stepped in to say that it would cover 2 weeks worth of statutory sick pay for eligible employees. Still in the process of sorting out the finer details of that, and it is only available to SMEs. So it's not a solution for everyone, but again, it is another of those elements of employment support that the government has put in place. Third area, and again, one of those things that's very relevant for the construction industry, where 50% of the on-site workforce is self-employed, was the government's move to the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme. So this is a taxable grant that covers trading profits up to the same £2,500 a month as was seen under the job retention scheme. However, it is fairly stringent around the criteria for that, so it's not just a free ride. As employers, yourself directly, this is perhaps less relevant, but the HMRC will be contacting eligible applicants in relation to that. A separate thing that's happened in relation to self-employed individuals is you may have seen that the government has postponed the implementation of its changes around IR35. Clearly, that happening at a time when the industry was undergoing significant challenges as a result of coronavirus, it was deemed that that would probably not be an appropriate thing. So that has been postponed for the time being. So that is a run through some of the key employment support issues. I'd be keen in the comments as well as questions if there are particular points, because as I'm going to come on to shortly, we do have daily engagement with the government on these issues. So if there are things that you would like the government to be doing that you are not seeing at the moment, put them in the chat here, or send any CECA member of staff an email or other form of message, and we'll feed all that into our discussions with the government. An example of that relates to the furlough scheme, where while it is very welcome by industry, there is a perception that the 3-week requirement that you have to be on furlough before you can be brought back was probably too long. So we're having a discussion with that about that date being dropped down to 2 weeks. Now, there's no guarantee that will happen, but it certainly appears to be resonating with the government. And it's only where you as members are sort of highlighting particular areas of concern, areas of interest, that we can take those points to government. So do fire in your queries and your ideas in relation to that. So the next section of this presentation relates to business support. So this is what the government is doing to support the construction industry and industry more generally, particularly in relation to ensuring that businesses remain viable. So in this space, specifically for construction, we did see a letter from the Secretary of State for Business, which was Alok Sharma. Now, that letter outlined the government's position in relation to construction, which is broadly focused on England, because clearly there's devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. But it was setting out the government's position, thanking the construction industry for all it was doing to help in the fight against coronavirus, whether that's building Nightingale hospitals or maintaining vital infrastructure, whether it was around donating stuff to the NHS. But it was also setting out that the fact that it was the government's position that it did want construction to continue where that could happen safely. And in terms of happening safely, it has focused on guidelines that it has been given by the Chief Medical Officer, the Chief Scientific Officer, and Public Health England as to what safe operation of construction should look like. There's been regular updates to that, and industry has responded by creating the site operating procedures, which hopefully you will be aware of, that tries to outline how we can operate safely on site. But I think for a lot of businesses, that letter from the Secretary of State was very welcome, because it did very clearly state whether it was appropriate to keep on working. It didn't say you must keep on working, but it gave some comfort to businesses that were keeping on working, that they weren't in some way in breach of government policy in this area. Turning to the more sort of financial matters, the government did launch two schemes to support businesses initially, and then followed up by a third one. So originally the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme and the Corporate Financing Facility were launched. Then that was followed by the loan scheme. It's also put in place deferred VAT payments for the next 3 months, HMRC's time to pay. Now, I'll be honest, when there's been other challenges in the industry in terms of slowdowns in the economy or particular challenges such as when Carillion went bust, time to pay didn't feel like it had been very helpful. But the feedback that we're getting is that actually this time around the HMRC time to pay system has been very positive and very prompt to address issues that have been raised with it by members. Sadly, some businesses will not survive or may find themselves in a position where they feel that they have a risk of trading insolvently. I think the government recognises that where otherwise good businesses are facing challenges that are specific to the coronavirus threat, they have put in place what you might call a Chapter 11 bankruptcy that you might see in America, where those businesses are able to trade while they sort out their affairs. So that's quite helpful for some businesses that might be right on the edge, but actually think, well, were it not for the issues around coronavirus, we would probably still have a viable business. And so that is also linked to sort of the directors' duties there, where individual directors won't find themselves being prosecuted for their behaviours during this period if they did continue to trade on a limited basis and in alignment with the slightly more flexible rules that have been put in place. So I'll move on to just go a little bit more detail on some of those loan schemes. So the first one was the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. So this was particularly focused on smaller businesses. So it provides access of up to £5 million, and it's for businesses of turnover up to £45 million, so basically SMEs. It will be interest-free to get these loans for 12 months. And in essence, the criteria is that you have to be an otherwise viable business. Again, that thing of you were trading perfectly normally up until the coronavirus issue occurred, and it has been that has caused you to have this need for loan funding. There were some early challenges with this, particularly A, lack of interest from some of the banks, and B, where the banks were putting this in place, they were asking for quite hard criteria around the support that was given, including personal guarantees. So there has been a removal of the requirement for personal guarantees up to £250,000 for loans up to £250,000. If I'm being honest, I still think it's quite challenging because although this is interest-free for 12 months, it is likely that the level of support that companies are going to be asking for, they are unlikely to be able to repay within 12 months, and then it goes on to commercial terms. And given the relatively low margin of industry, the ability of companies to pay back these loans in the longer term may be questionable in some cases. I think it's a keep the wolf from the door measure. It's not a solving the problem in the fullness of time issue. On top of that, so there was the large firms. So this is similar to the SME firm, but it was in recognition that there was a gap for firms that were not small enough to access this, but not big enough to access some of the other forms of support that have been put in place. So that was announced late last week. And it's the companies between 45 million and 500 million turnover and allows loans of up to 25 million. However, that's straight onto commercial terms. So again, I think the same issues apply as to whether it's truly attractive for many of the businesses that might be able to tap into it. The final of the loans is the corporate financing facility. So this is for businesses of over £500 million, and it is a Bank of England led approach to purchasing commercial paper, i.e. up to 12-month debt. To be blunt, I'm guessing probably if this is relevant to you, you're probably not on this call because it will be sort of finance directors at large organisations taking part in that, and you will already have been appraised of it. However, just for completeness, I have included it in the slides. Definitely more helpful, though, was the decision to defer VAT payments between 20th of March and 30th of June. It should be noted it is just a deferral, but given that we know that cash flow is going to be a challenge during this period, anything that just releases a little bit more current cash into the system can only be welcome. So I'm just going to try and move on to the next slide. So I then said we would talk about procurement support. So I've been at CECA for 12 years now, so I do remember in the global financial crisis some of the challenges that we had with the way that individual clients, including public sector clients, worked or didn't work with their suppliers. So we were, about 2-3 weeks ago, all ready to go, sort of sword raised towards the client saying, you know, you've got to help industry out. But actually, we've been quite pleased by how quickly the Crown Commercial Service, which is basically the policy wing of the Cabinet Office, or the procurement policy wing of the Cabinet Office, acted to put in place 2 notes to public customers, telling them basically to support their supply chain and giving advice on how they can get work procured more rapidly. I think of the 2, it's the relief to suppliers that is the most important, and the major part of that was a clear recommendation that public sector customers should look at their at-risk suppliers, and the guidance is very clear that they say at the moment probably all or nearly all construction suppliers will be at risk. So this isn't some sort of small cohort. This should be almost any construction company working for a public sector client, and that public sector client should look at whether it can provide rapid payment to maintain cash flow within the supply chain. This ain't a free lunch. If you are the organisation that is in receipt of that advance payment or that speeded up payment, there is an expectation and you will be asked to do so on an open book basis that you make those payments down your supply chain to ensure that the cash does get all the way through the supply chain. We are seeing that be implemented by industry's customers. I know that of the really big ones, Network Rail and Highways England have both made commitments to this. It would be good to hear where it's not happening. We're getting some reports that some public bodies are being quite resistant to implementing this. So again, in terms of our activities, we can do so on an anonymous basis, but we do need to know if anyone's not playing the game on this, because this is the kind of stuff that will save companies over the next few weeks and months. Then earlier this week, we saw publication of some updated guidance, which was more specific about this support, but focusing on construction. Within that, it creates some model terms for how this can be contractualized within NEC3 and other commonly used suites of contracts. And it brings up options such as certification of interim valuations. It brings up potentially that as well as accelerating payment, you could make the payments more regularly so that suppliers aren't having to wait a long period. So that was some of the positives. On the perhaps the more negative side of things, it wasn't very clear, or as clear as we would like it to have been, around retentions. We had recommended that with about £5 billion of the industry's money sitting in retentions at the moment, it would be a positive step, seeing as that's basically dead money to those customers, if that could be pushed back out into the companies that the retentions are held over. We're still doing some work on that, but we'd hoped that this guidance note would make greater clarity on that. It was a bit mealy-mouthed. It said if you're confident you've got no defects, maybe you want to release them, but on your own head be it type stuff, which wasn't terribly helpful. They did also recommend that clients might want to shift across to project bank accounts to support the supply chain during coronavirus. I get where they're coming from on that, but I think the last thing we need right now is live contracts being moved across onto a different approach to payment and all of the sort of the bureaucracy associated with that. Fair enough for new contracts, but for existing contracts to have to change their terms, I don't know. Whenever that was drafted, I'm not sure whether that's what they really had in mind. So that's procurement support. Then I'd talk a little bit about what CECA has been doing. So it would have been 3-4 weeks ago that it was very clear that suddenly, and you'll remember this, over the course of maybe 2 or 3 days, this went from not being an issue at all to being the only issue in town. During that period, CECA's initial activity was a bit bizarre. We spent some time reading Italian newspapers, translated Italian newspapers, to try and get some sense of what had happened in Italy, because obviously they were 10 days, 15 days ahead of the UK, so it gave us some insight to some of the particular challenges. That formed the basis of us working with Build UK to put a very early request to government to support industry. Off the back of that, we created a group of the industry's federations that has subsequently morphed into what's called the Construction Industry Task Force. So every day we speak with the Department for Business across all of the issues that come up in relation to coronavirus. And this, again, I just want to reinforce, that's why your feedback is so essential, because the stuff that we get, we condense overnight and take into those calls every day. And it does have real impacts in terms of the stuff that comes through there. An example of that being, pretty early on, we had a conversation with CITB and said it would be madness for there to be CITB levy contribution invoices landing on people's desks during the current period. And so we were able to secure agreement from CITB that would be postponed for at least the next 3 months. And I suspect we may see further activity there, depending on how long things continue. We then drew together a letter to the Prime Minister, and that focused on some particular asks, and this was across the whole of the industry. So it was about holidays for construction companies on CIS and PAYE payments. It was about support for SMEs and particularly those where it's sort of owner-operator companies. Greater flexibility around some of the procurement issues that we talked about on the previous slide. I mentioned before the retention stuff. We recommended that those retentions will be released. And I think we've had a question already about apprenticeship levy. So one of our key recommendations was that the government should suspend apprenticeship levy contributions, and not only suspend them, they should release the current unspent levy back into the industry to support the continuing employment of apprentices. We are expecting, or we're told to expect, a letter in response from the Prime Minister in the coming days. Obviously, it won't be from him himself. It will be from his team. But yeah, the stuff that you tell us gets directly to the heart of government. We've put out advice on employment, so there's been various briefing notes that have come out on all of the various approaches to employment. We are actually in the process of putting together a HR handbook for coronavirus, just so it's all in one place and is absolutely up to date. So that should be with you, if not today, early next week. You'll have seen the daily briefings. We both do a CECA specific daily briefing, but also recognising that it's important our supply chain knows about some of these issues. You may see that all of the construction trade newspapers publish what's called the construction newsletter each day. That is something that CECA prepares on behalf of industry to make sure that all parts of our supply chain have access to guidance. It's not quite as detailed as the CECA one, because clearly there's some stuff that we want to make sure that you guys know about, but it is all part of what's been quite heartening, which is the whole industry pulling together to act on some of these issues. There was some advice on temporary suspension of sites. Clearly, where companies are shutting down their sites, I think most companies wouldn't need to be told how to shut down a site. You do it over Christmas, things like that. But it was just, given that it might be a prolonged suspension, it was felt that it might be sensible just to put in place some guidance on that. So that was published a couple of weeks ago. Perhaps the highest profile thing has been the Construction Leadership Council's guidance on site operating procedures. So this is translating the government's position on safe working on site into construction-specific procedures. That has been prepared. It's now, they're currently preparing the third version of it based on some changes that came from government yesterday. But that, in essence, gives some support to businesses to know that they are doing the right thing when they are operating on site, that they are working to industry agreed procedures for safe trading. Another issue that's come up through members is, even if you want to continue working, even if you know you can work safely, that's all well and good. But if you've got no supply of materials, everything grinds to a halt fairly quickly. So we have been in daily contact with the Builders Merchants Federation and the Construction Products Association. We're due to have further calls on that in the coming days. And the aim there would be to provide some certainty to manufacturers and product and merchants about that there will be a market there, because that's the reason why they're perhaps being reticent about supply, and providing certainty to you as contractors that those merchants will start to reopen, that the manufacturers will start up the production lines again. So given that that's something that you guys have been telling us is a huge issue, we will keep on with that. And finally, I think is around mental health training. So one of the big issues that we know will come up is that this will have issues in relation to people's mental well-being among your staff. So in the last couple of days, we have advertised some mental health well-being training, both for managers and individuals, to help out with that. Been bowled over the level of interest in that. So I think most of those places are already gone, but if there's continuing demand, we'll look at doing more. And I think there are still a couple of places left. So if you're keen, jump now, I suppose I'd say. And that, I think, is, the one final slide. So through the task force, we are also looking forward. Clearly, I hope that the coronavirus threat will recede in the coming weeks and months. However, with it going away, it doesn't mean that the industry will bounce back immediately to full health. We recognise that there are going to be some real challenges, simple things like if you're facing cash flow problems and then you need to resource up to restart sites, that's going to put further pressure on businesses. So I, along with a couple of colleagues from industry, have been asked to draft a sector recovery plan that we will try and get agreed by the whole of the industry for what the steps that we need to take, what the steps are that government needs to take in order to allow the industry to recover as quickly as possible. It's at a skeleton document stage at the moment, so there's the best possible opportunity for you as members to influence what goes into there. These sort of 5 themes within it are how we support the recovery of the UK economy. So that's probably around how we can get shovel-ready works going as quickly as possible. So if there are schemes out there that you know are on the verge of being ready and just need a little bit of a nudge, do let us know, because we'll include those in our proposals to government. Next bit is about securing a sustainable future for companies. So this is if companies are facing financial challenges, what things can we do to help out on that? So that may be things like, I dare say, looking at red diesel changes and whether they should really be going ahead. But that's a very sort of a niche issue. There'll be some huge big picture stuff there. It's also things like, what can we do to reduce the prevalence of disputes in the sector, because nothing's going to cause more trouble to more businesses than if we're all at daggers drawn over various disputes. So it's what can be done to take some of the sting out of the potential commercial contractual issues that would otherwise likely emerge. Next is around supporting the workforce. So clearly there are a lot of people out there on furlough at the moment. So it's how can we bring them back in and starting working again? Is there opportunities? There are a lot of people who are currently unemployed across the wider economy. Might there be opportunities to bring them in for roles in the construction industry? And if so, what would we need to do to sheep dip people to bring them into the sector? Maximising value for government investment is basically when you look at the amount of money that the government is pouring into the fight against coronavirus, it is vastly in excess of what happened in the global financial crisis, and we have lived the last decade through the consequences of that. So there is not going to be a huge amount of public sector funding available. So any money that is coming into construction, we need to make sure is spent as well as possible. So this is what part can we play in ensuring the efficiency of spend. So that may be looking at what a more efficient industry looks like going forward. And finally, around maintaining health, safety and well-being, there is absolutely no point in getting through the coronavirus threat only for it to re-emerge because we've started to be unsafe. So it's about how we can reopen our sites safely, what we may need to do about monitoring, and how we can ensure that we have appropriate PPE to manage delivery going forward. So that is where we are with Sector Recovery Plan. We're expecting to publish it by the end of April. So yes, definitely please do let us know if you have anything that you want to be in there. So that's the end of my slides. I think we can bring up a page with the questions. Gemma, who's with me on. So I think if I say show question list, it should. On the furlough scheme, they're stating a maximum claim of £2,500 per month. Is that a calendar month or a 4-week month? I believe it's a calendar month. However, that is one of the ones where we are going to have to go away and check just to confirm that that's correct. Now, I'm hoping, how do I move on to... In relation to furlough, if an individual is classified as high risk, but there remains work for them to undertake on a live site, can they be furloughed? Or does furlough only apply when there is no work for them to undertake? So furlough definitely does apply when there is no work or when the person is has caring responsibilities. I think if they are high risk, they just receive SSP. But again, that's one I'm going to need to go back and check the specifics on. I don't want to give the wrong advice, so it would be better if we do clarify that and come back to you very shortly. Can people go on and off furlough? This has been a huge thing. So I've mentioned that we've had these daily calls. every single day we have had since furlough was announced, we have had this discussion. Um, the objective is to try and get the period for, because you have to be at the moment off on furlough for 3 weeks. The aim is to get that down to 2 weeks because although it sounds like it's not that big of a difference, it makes a huge difference for a lot of organisations. What you can't do is be on furlough one day and off furlough the next day. Initially, it looked like you could only furlough once, but the government clarified on that, so you can go on and off. But at the moment, you have to have that 3 weeks. As I say, we are trying hard to get that down to 2 weeks. I wouldn't put my house on it, but I'm reasonably positive we will get it down to 2 weeks shortly. If we can get another question. What is the protocol when an employee is pulled off a furlough prior to the 3 week minimum period? Do the weeks not get paid? I believe that in essence, they would be treated as if they had been in employment if they don't make the full 3 weeks. So they would be assumed to be paid 100%, and you certainly wouldn't get support for that. Again, I will clarify that because that is my understanding of the situation, but I believe it would be treated as if they are as if they had been working through that entire period. Are CECA offering any online courses or signposts for courses for anyone who might be on furlough? Yes. So one of the things that we have checked with government was whether people can do training while they are on furlough. The answer is an unambiguous yes, as long as the training is not mandatory and as long as it is not in some way fee generating for the organisation. So what we can do is put on courses, and we are trying to do as much as possible of this to allow people to, while I'm not saying people are sitting with their feet up, but while people have some time while on furlough, if there's anything we can do to do top-up training, helpful courses, whether it's commercial stuff, we would really love your recommendations as to what you would like training courses on, because now we've got the ability to do these seminars. The ability to do that stuff is pretty unlimited. So it's just, what do you want? And we can put that in place. And I should say we already have some of those in place. Would CECA consider having a job board where people impacted could advertise roles? So we are looking at this in a broader sense, insofar as not just in relation to people, but in relation to resource in general. We're finding ourselves in a situation where, because different customers are taking different approaches to whether sites are operational or not, you've got some members that are clamouring for resource, and you've got other members that are, have got a surfeit of resource. So we are talking about what we're calling a sort of resource balancing. I hope we've got something to come on that. I think in the Northwest there are some trials to look at that. In relation to individuals, historically, CECA has been quite reticent about having job boards because it's great for the person who manages to hire someone through a job board, but then they're normally hiring from a CECA member. And therefore, we get someone going, well, hang on, I've just lost my best QS. We've always been resistant. But I do think there is a good argument for, in the current climate, allowing to advertise roles. So we'll take that away and have a discussion with our board about whether that's something we might want to proceed with. In a recent article, Network Rail were starting immediate payments. Could pressure be put on larger main contractors to pass this down to SMEs? Absolutely. All of the public sector clients should be, through the way that they are contractualizing this accelerated payment, it should be on the basis that it is open book and there is visibility that those payments are being made down to SMEs. Clearly, that will only be payments in relation to accelerated payments. It won't be all of their payments across the whole of their business, but the government has been very, very clear that it will expect to see this. The challenge will be, is it actually being monitored? But I think that's probably about as far as the individual clients can go. Clearly, there will also be some reputational issues were it ever to be discovered that people were sitting on cash. I haven't actually had any reports from people that that's not been the case. And in fact, we have had some positive reports from companies saying that they didn't expect to see money from their tier one as quickly as they had, but it was because it had been coming in. So next, please. Which clause of the CECA form is applicable to the administration of COVID-19 delays and cost recovery? That's a good question, and it's the first one that's bamboozled me. I am not, it sounds embarrassing, as strictly speaking, we are the owners of it, but I am not myself an expert in the blue form, so I will need to go and get someone who's a bit better versed in it to come back to you on that, so my apologies. Is version 3 of the CLC SOP going to be correct? V2 was withdrawn very quickly due to being unworkable. We must avoid confusion. Absolutely. It would be very easy for me to pass the buck and say, well, it was other people that did that bit of work, and therefore it wasn't our fault. We did, albeit only by about 10 minutes, get sight of the SOPs. And on a scan, it didn't, to us, appear that it was that much different to the V1. However, in hindsight, of course it was, because it just suddenly meant that anyone doing an assessment couldn't operate within 2 meters. So will version 3 be correct? The answer is we assume so, because we are going to be consulting on it with a much larger audience and giving them more time to comment. Over the weekend, I think you will see a lot of people, including CECA and its members, having the opportunity to discuss and comment on a draft version of V3. But yeah, I do want to defend the people who put it together. At the end of the day, this is one of these things where people are moving very quickly, and the people who did it are the people who were willing to step up and do some work on behalf of the industry. There were quite a lot of people who stepped back and weren't willing. So I do get the frustrations around the second version of the site operating procedures, but equally, there are going to be challenges that happen in what is a very fast-moving issue. Is that all the questions? I think that may have been all of the questions. Well, thank you all very much for your time this afternoon. If there's anything else that does come up after today's session, please do get in touch with any of your contacts within CECA. Also tell us if there's specific webinars that you want. I think we will do something around furlough, but there can be plenty of other things that we can be putting these on. I hope it was of value to you, and do let us know if it wasn't, if it was something that didn't work for you, because we want to make these as effective as possible to you. The only final thing to say is I hope it's sunny where you are. I know you can't get much out of the house, but hopefully at least where you do get out of the house, it's a pleasant day. Have a great bank holiday weekend, and hopefully we'll be back in touch again soon. Thank you all very much.